So moving on, we are going to continue building our logo using the modeling tools we looked at in the previous tutorial, as well as some new things that we may not have looked at yet. So in Cinema, this is where we left off. Let's go back to the logo here, and I'm going to go to polygon mode. Let's select everything, just press Ctrl and A. I'm going to hide this guide for now. And I'm going to right click, let's go to Extrude, click anywhere and drag to the right, and then just go to the offset over here and set this to 10 for the first extrusion. Then I'm going to right click and go to Extrude Inner, and what this does is just shrink your selection toward the center of the polygons. This is going to be 5. Let's leave that for now, and I'm gonna get the knife tool. So press M followed by K and go to mode. Let's set this to loop, and we want to make a cut right down the middle of these new edges that we have just created. Basically these outer boundaries that you can see here. So if I just quickly select them just to highlight what we are operating on, I can get the knife tool again, and in loop mode, just go to one of the edges here, and you can see the loop goes all the way around. And if you have your geometry set up correctly and everything is working, this is the feedback you should be seeing. If I just get a little bit closer, I'm going to press Shift whilst hovering over one of the corners, and this will allow me to release the loop and manually type in an offset. And I'm going to set this to 50% so that this cut is going to be right down the middle of the selected area. And then just left click to confirm that cut, and now we have that line running through the middle of our selection. Let's move over here and do the same. So just press Shift when the highlight is in the right place. Move over here, set this to 50, and then click again to confirm the cut. And just do this for the rest of the selection. Then I want to go to edge mode, press U and L for loop selection once again, and I'm gonna select those cuts I just created. And if I press space to go back to the live selection tool, I want to move this out by I think 5 units. So set this to -15, and it's gonna start to look like this. Now this little section I just created here is this sharp edge you see on the outside. Let's move on to the next step. I'm going to go back to polygon mode, and I'm just going to select the inside section. Then I'm going to right click and go to extrude, and this time I'm going to set the offset to just 5. And that should bring the rest of these polygons in line with this edge that we created. If we quickly take a glance at the preview, you can see this now kind of comes back in on itself to create another bevel. So let's just, let me get my selection back first of all, and I'm just going to right click and go to bevel. The way the bevel tool works in polygon mode, it's like combining the extrude tool and the Extrude Inner. The Extrude tool, as you just saw prior to this, is used to raise or lower polygons. And the Extrude Inner, as you saw even earlier, it basically shrinks the selection. So the bevel tool does both at the same time. And the offset controls what the Extrude Inner object will be doing. So that's how much this is going to shrink the selection. And the extrusion down here is pretty straightforward. That's how much it's going to push in or out. So let's try this. I'm going to set the offset to 5 and the extrusion to 5, and then press enter. And as you can see, the selection is shrunk. It's gone in by 5 units from the edges of our polygons toward the middle, and then it's also been pushed out using the extrusion control over here. And this can be positive or negative. Now just a quick glance at the top here, we can see some problems. Some of these shapes are now intersecting with each other. I could try and just lower the offset to something like 3 maybe, and that's going to make the problem slightly less pronounced, but it's still there as you can see. There are 2 ways to fix this, but I cannot remember which method I used in the preview. So what I can do is just make a copy of the logo and then create a new null object, and let's call this backup. And I'm just going to drop this logo in here and just switch this off so we don't see it. So if I need to come back to this later, I can just pull this out of the backup null. The first method of trying to fix this is selecting both the points, press T for the scale, and then just pull on the Y scale here, pull down until this sort of unwinds and stop intersecting with the next polygon. This kind of works halfway because now the shape is a little bit messed up. You could try and manually position this until it looks more correct, but this means you'd have to go to the other side and basically do the same operation, and it's not going to look the same on both the sides. So I think I probably went with this other solution, which is a lot faster and a lot simpler. Just select both the points, right click and go to weld, and just weld in the middle, and that is the result. Much faster and looks cleaner, and you can do this to the other side and it's gonna look the same. Let's zoom out here and see what we've created. I can see there's another problem down here, and it's to do with these 2 points. So let me get the weld tool and just close that up. A quick preview render, and you can see this is starting to resemble what we have in the preview video. If I rewind back to the beginning, let's take a closer look at these edges. You can see they are quite sharp in some areas, and then other areas they're a little bit rounded. And to achieve this, we need to add more edge loops. But before we do that, I'm going to the array icon at the top here and get the symmetry object. Currently, we only have 1/2 of the logo, and it's at the front. We want to take it and drop it into the symmetry object, and then go to mirror plane and set this to X, Y. And that's going to mirror the geometry at the front here to be at the back as well. And this is going to give us the full shape and volume of the logo. Now looking at this, I have a suspicion that this section here might be too wide or too deep. It looks as though it's about twice the length of what we have here, whereas right now it's about 4 times the length. This extrusion here was 10 units and this was 5 units. Now this is now doubled up to 20 and this is still 5. So to correct this, I can just switch off the symmetry, go back to the logo and go to edge mode. I'm going to press U and L for loop selection, and I just want to select the loops at the back. And I can just move these by 5 units toward the front here. And just as I did that, I just realized there's a simpler way. If I'm in point mode, I can still make loop selections on the points on the back. Then I can go to select and invert to select everything else except for the points at the back. Then I can just set the position here to be what it is plus 5. So everything is going to shift back by 5 units relative to each other. And now when I re-enable this, this distance here looks more like it does in the preview. Let's click back on the logo, and it might be worth just making another copy for backup. And this is something I do in every project. Each time I do a major modification to what I'm working on, I will just make a copy and drop it inside of a null called backup, in case I need to go back to it and change something else. Little problem over here, we must have selected one of these points by accident. So let's just grab this and let's set this back to -15, and there you go. Let's go to edge mode, press U and L, and let's start with the sharp sections which are on the edge here. So that's the selection. I can go down here, right click and bevel, and I'm going to set the offset to 1 and the subdivision to 1 as well, and then hit apply. And now if I go to the NURBS icon and get a subdivision surface, let's drop this whole thing in here. The sharp edge gets rounded a little bit, and it's going to be the sharpest section on the whole logo. Let's zoom out here, and we'll basically need to continue adding some extra loop cuts like we just did to that edge, so that we have smoothing where we need it, but we still maintain the original shape. So if I just close these two for now, in edge mode still, I'm going to get my loop selection, so U and L, and I can go to the corners, and I'm just going to select the diagonal lines here and not the lines which go across. But the way the loop selection works, it will try to complete a loop, and so it ends up selecting other areas that I don't want to select. To fix that, I need to go to the loop selection and stop at boundary edges. So click this, and now I can select just the diagonal lines, and it doesn't force it to loop back around. Let's go ahead and select every edge. So this section here, this wraps around and comes back over here, and that's fine because we need that section as well. And we're going to do the same here. Anywhere there's a corner, basically we want to make that selection. And I'm just pressing Shift to add to my selection. Let's go to the top here. Let's select this and do the same over the other side. And actually we need to select the front sections as well, and a little bit further down. And hopefully you can see some kind of pattern to this. We're gonna go to the inside and make that selection in there too. There's a corner here, it's a very shallow one, but I think we need to add it to the selection. And that loop actually wraps around all the way to the back there, but this is not a corner, so I can deselect some areas. And the way you deselect is just press Ctrl, and that subtracts from your selection. It can stop there. Let's go back to loop selection, make that selection over here, and we can deselect over here. Just getting closer if you need to get some areas which are smaller. And this is all the selection for the top section. I can continue to the rest of the logo, and normally I might have just fast forwarded this section just because it's quite tedious, and I'm basically doing the same thing over and over. But this tutorial and the rest of the series is made to be accessible by all types of users, including absolute beginners. So I'm just going to hold your hand quite a lot in some of these areas, just so you don't make any mistakes by accident. So we needed this corner here, but we didn't need it to go all the way around to the underside. But in this case, actually, because this is a straight edge anyway, adding extra cuts is not going to alter the shape. So perhaps we can just leave it as it is. And we need to make the same selection across the other side. And then that corner, the whole front face, and just this here. I think I can fast forward this section without confusing too many people. Okay, that looks good. Now I can right click and bevel, and basically using the same settings as I did on the very edge here, I'm just going to hit apply, and this is going to add a lot of edge loops. Let me click away, and let's just look at our geometry here and see if there's any problems. And there seems to be a significant amount over here, and I guess it's the same on the opposite side, so we'll review that shortly. But everywhere else looks fine. There's another issue right here, and I know what happened over here, but I'm not sure what's going on up here. So let's tackle one problem at a time. I'm going to undo this, and down here I noticed as I was making the selection, these 2 points were a little bit too close to each other, so I could widen the distance between them, or I can just close them up. So let me right click and weld. Let's close this up, and if I go back to edge mode, you can see the selection is still there, so I can right click and we can bevel once again, click apply, and you can see that fixes that issue. But over here we still have some weirdness going on, so let me undo again, and let's do a live update by just holding left click and beveling this. And it looks as though this is to do with the radius. Past a certain point, I cannot avoid some of these shapes bumping into each other. So the quick and easy solution is basically don't go past that threshold, stay under, and it just results in a tighter and sharper edge. But if you really must use a certain number, then you would just separate the bevel here with the bevel on the rest of the logo and just use a smaller radius up here and a higher radius down here. I think in this case I can get away with just going with a slightly lower number. It seems around 0.7 is the limit, and then I have to stop. But if I get symmetry and subdivision surface, and I missed a section here, don't worry. I want to press N and A to disable those lines, and now you can see this looks a lot more like the geometry in the preview. So you've got some smooth edges where you need them, and also this very sharp edge going around the rest of the logo. Let's fix this section we missed. I can just switch these two off. Still in loop mode, press U and L for loop selection, and we can just select down the middle. It's gonna go left or right, so we want to grab the right side as well. And here we can just bevel this. And I was expecting this to work without any problems, but because we are trying to bevel on top of an existing bevel, the intersections are going to appear much sooner with the smaller numbers. So it might be worth actually undoing back even further to this stage, make that missing selection, and this time I can right click, bevel with an offset of 0.7 and a subdivision of 1, and just click apply. And if I go all the way back out, enable the symmetry and subdivision surface, you can see we have our final shape. Something that I perhaps should have mentioned before getting this far, we've been using the bevel tool quite a lot, and I'm using Cinema 4D R15, and I know that between 14 and 15 there were some major improvements to how the bevel tool works. This might not be the case if you're working with earlier versions of Cinema 4D. So if you find yourself unable to emulate what I'm doing here, then it might be because you are running a lower version of Cinema 4D. Most of the tools are pretty much the same in all releases going back quite a few years, but I know that the bevel tool was improved quite significantly in the last 2 releases. So you might have to update your Cinema 4D to follow along as closely as possible. But that marks the end of this tutorial. In the next section, we're going to start texturing our logo and creating this hot edge effect. See you then.